health treatment is so important,
Yeah,
especially
no, it is.
psychology
It is.
and various forms of counseling. So,
It is, and it's unfortunate there has been a lot of stigma against the mentally ill and against mental health treatment, and we haven't touched on it yet, but that is another one of the really negative aspects of Scientology's, uh, the devil. What do you call it? The way they impugn them and make them into a devil is that it contributes to the stigma about psychiatry. I mean, you remember, Jeff, how badly anybody who's received any kind of therapy is stigmatized.
mhm.
It's horrible, right? I mean, there was a long time where if you've ever had any psychiatric medication, you couldn't be processed. You couldn't get audited. Remember that? You were what they call an illegal PC, meaning you
Yep.
were, yeah. Well, that did change. Miscavige, I guess under the guise of money scavenge, he decided so many people were coming in and wanted to, there was a period in the 90s where, thank you, the word is demonizing. Thank you. It's so nice. I wish I had this chat with me all the time, like in a heads up display, so I could constantly, like,
That'd
just,
be amazing.
yeah, I could just get corrected by people who actually know. No, I knew that word. I just, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. Anyway, so yeah, they
I was
demonize
thinking
psychiatry.
vilification.
That works too. They demonize and they
Yeah.
vilify and they contribute to the stigma against both people who've been treated and people who do the treatment. And that's not a good thing because they're not offering an alternative to severe mental illness. And they do offer an alternative to depression, anxiety, fears, phobias, nightmares. I'm trying to think of the whole list of Dianetics marketing words. They do offer an alternative to that, but it doesn't work. But they did loosen up on the, like so many people were showing up in the 90s who'd had taken Prozac that Miscavige said, no, that's fine. I mean, he literally internally said, we have to let these people, what we say online, meaning allowed to take courses, because there's just too many of them. What are we going to do? Right? So,
I didn't know that.
well, you wouldn't because it was an internal thing. It was not, it was like if somebody came in who was on Prozac, they were still allowed to because they figured there was there wasn't there. I know they did an EST repair, right? They did
Yeah.
they did, which EST being a spin-off of Scientology. That you'd ever done EST, they would give you some auditing, what they call repair, and I believe there was also one aimed at some antidepressants and some mental health care that people had had. As long as you hadn't been, as long as it was casual, I'm not talking about institutionalized, that was still
Right.
really forbidden. But if you had, because remember, most antidepressants are not prescribed by psychiatrists, they're prescribed by your family doctor. Because you're like, yeah, I've really been
Hmm.
depressed. Well, here, try this. Uh, so, a guy who just went in and maybe he was under here's a perfect example. 12 years ago, when I went to try to quit smoking, I was still a very loyal Scientologist, although I wasn't particularly acting like one in my private life. But I went in to see my doctor. I told him, I said, he was, oh, they always make a thing about, if you think about, my doctor was really cool. He'd say, he wouldn't tell me to stop smoking. He would say, if you think about if you want to try to quit smoking, talk to me. I can help you. Like it was very cool. And at some point, about 12 years ago, I was done smoking, and I went and told him. I said, I'm quitting. And he said, well, I could write you a script for Wellbutrin, which is an antidepressant. And he said,
Hmm.
we've had a lot of success with this, with helping people. I think it might be me that's freezing. Somebody asked if am I freezing or Mitch? Am I freezing to you, Jeff?
Sometimes, but it's not that big of a deal.
Okay, well, just so you all know, I'm building a studio in my spare bedroom so that from there I'll be able to hardwire to my computer, and it'll because I have really good Wi-Fi, but apparently it's not good enough. So anyway, I was really appalled that he would prescribe Wellbutrin, like an antidepressant, to quit smoking, and he said, "Oh, but we've had a lot of success with it." But my point is that most people get antidepressants casually from their doctor, and under those
Hmm.
circumstances, Miscavige decided, screw it. These people are okay because there's just too many of them. We're gonna lose too much business, so we're gonna take them, and they did.
Yeah. Now, on that note, correct me if I'm wrong about this. So the main reason behind LRH saying that people who had been institutionalized or were under psychiatric care was because of a fear of plants and people
Yeah.
working into the organization and then going crazy and then basically destroying the organization from within. It's not necessarily that the drugs are the cause of it. It's because he's worried about infiltration of people. Is that correct, or at least
Yeah,
mostly
that
correct?
based on everything I ever read when I was researching all of this, basically what he said was people don't, and this is actually, he wrote this in one of his films. Sometimes people don't even know they were shocked because they drug them first. This was in one, that was in one of
Yeah.
the tech films. So, and this is true, they do now use less current and they use very strong muscle relaxers and they put you to sleep when they shock you. So people don't realize that they were shocked. And
Yeah.
Hubbard wrote about a thing called PDH, which stands for pain drug hypnosis. And he said this is the way. Remember, this is 50s. This is right when the word brainwashing was invented. It was invented during the Korean War because these POWs, American POWs, were being made, they were getting in front of a camera and saying, I hate my country, I love North Korea, I love communism, blah, blah, blah. And people were really worried that the communists, the Chinese communists and the Soviet communists, had discovered a way to take a person and brainwash them, so turn them into like a robot that would be completely believing in their whatever it was they were trying to do. This was a huge fear. I mean, watch The Manchurian Candidate, which was made probably in the late 50s, which is a story about sleeper agents. There's this idea that you could create a sleeper agent, and the person would be, there was what? There were the Americans. They did a whole series about, the commies next door. So there was all of this
Hmm.
fear. I mean, we're not going to get into it now, but we spoke last time about when we showed that clip of Miscavige talking about Siberia, USA, and that being, which is actually a very good bill to get good mental health services to Native Alaskans, anybody in Alaska, but mostly Native Alaskans. And the Scientology was on the bandwagon to defeat it. They called it like a communist plot. Like everything there was, fluoride was a communist plot. Remember that? Do you know about that, Jeff? They
I
put
don't remember
fluoride in
that,
the.
but it's
Well,
not
when I was
surprising.
a kid, they put fluoride in the water. Fluoride's a metal. It may or may not be good for you, but it improved dental health, the hardness of your
Yeah.
teeth. This was a communist plot. Did you ever see Doctor Strangelove, the film Doctor Strangelove?
Years and
That's,
years ago,
by
yeah.
the way, for Friday, that's Mitch's movie recommendation. Everybody run out and watch Doctor Strangelove. There's the whole thing. An Air Force general who goes completely out of his mind, and he's going to start, World War III, and he keeps writing this initials POE, which stands for purity of essence, and he keeps talking about precious bodily fluids, and he's talking about two things. It's a reference to fluoride, which was supposedly put in the water to make us all commies, and the other one was the polio vaccine, which they called the monkey vaccine, because these were the original anti-vax QAnon folks, right, who were all into all this
Yeah.
anti-communist stuff, right? Anyway, so Hubbard was in on all that kind of really wacky far right, the conspiracy theory. They're gonna turn us in anyway. So I lost track here. So we're talking about PDH, right? Pain drug hypnosis. So
Yes.
he was convinced that the way that they would create these plants, these sleeper agents that would go into Scientology organizations and then destroy them without them even knowing what they were doing. He did that because he very clearly wanted the public to think that brainwashing could only be achieved if you were using pain and drugs and hypnosis on the subject. but he was trying to hide the fact that you can brainwash people much more subtly. You can brainwash them by redefining their own reality, by convincing them that they're inhabited by, they're infested with, with beings that need to be handled, by convincing them that they have a reactive mind. Like all these kinds of things and these principles are brainwashing. And Hubbard wrote a film, which we never finished, called Brainwashing. And the entire purpose of the film was to convince the public that brainwashing is what the Koreans did, not what Scientology does. It even says in the film, some people say that we're engaged in brainwashing, but we don't use drugs and we don't use hypnosis, which is true. I mean, they do use hypnosis, but it's a subtle form of it.
Yeah.
But you get what I'm saying? So like, the whole PDH thing, the whole plants coming into the church, that's part of a sort of a propaganda to get people to think that brainwashing is not something that they do. You get what it's something to
Yeah.
keep the demonizing of that devil going. Because I'll tell you something, little unimportant people don't have enemies. Only big important people have enemies. You get what I'm saying?
Yep.
So
Well,
the
and
bigger,
there's a whole there's a whole like policy and program called signs of success. And essentially, the better Scientology is doing, the more the SPs are screaming, and so that like
right,
if you're being attacked by
right,
all angles, that means in Scientology you're doing a really good job. So keep
yeah.
doing that. Don't
So I
look at the
was,
fact that you're doing something wrong and damaging people. Like
so
that's not the
Jeff,
point of it. So
how good do you think they must think they're doing now?
their stats must be really high right now
Yeah,
because
they must think they're
they are
doing.
being attacked from all angles.
Yeah, that must. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so that.
So
Yeah.
back to let's move back to like lobotomies and so forth and all
Oh,
that. Is
please,
there
let's
anything
talk
else
about
you wanted to say
lobotomy.
on this? What's that? Yeah, the Phineas Gage, is that right?
No,
That's
no.
his
With
name.
that, I
Um,
wanted to just show that those two stories, which are both in the museum and are very commonly told, that the one about Ugo Cerletti, who the
mhm.
Italian psychiatrist who invented shock therapy from seeing pig slaughter. That's a true story. But the one on Phineas Gage inspiring the lobotomy, 100% false. You put those two together and you get enough truth that you believe the whole thing. I was just trying to make that point. The museum is full of
Okay.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And what's the point of this museum, do you figure? Like so there's two aspects I can look at it from. The point of the museum from like a public facing way, like like celebrities and various people in levels of government. But what do you figure is more important to sign, like the Sea Org, I guess? Is it the public, or is it more geared towards Scientology and furthering their aims and so forth? What do you think is the
What
true
do you mean by
reason for this?
public? You mean people who are Scientologists?
Non-Scientologist versus Scientology public, I guess, would say.
Well, I think it's very important. Scientology runs a number of I call them do-gooder puff PR machines. Let me break that down.
Hmm.
Do-gooder, as in do good. PR puff, meaning creating all this PR that you exist for the betterment of the society, and they're machines because they're very well-oiled, very well-designed machines, and so that's one of them. And they have these various different what they call social betterment programs. And the museum, which is part of the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, it's not specifically one of the social betterment programs, which are, in illiteracy, with study technology and with the way to happiness and the volunteer ministers. Those are more considered to be the social betterment program. CCHR is just kind of related to that. But it's really a way of saying, look, we do good things. I mean, look, it's not that hard like they've gotten at least 20 psychiatrists and psychologists jailed for crimes, okay? Because
Hmm.
they're, it's not hard. Pick any profession, and if you really put enough attention on it, You could find 20 people committing crimes and throw them in jail. But then what they say is they say all of mental health. That's all of mental health. That's every one of your psychiatrists. That's every one of your psychologists. Look how many of them have gone to jail. You know, it's just a matter of time before they all go to jail, right? So
Yeah.
they can weave this into a story that makes it look like, oh, those Scientologists actually care about society. They care about children because they're making a point about the overdrugging of children, which is an issue. They care about school shootings. And so they make a point about the need. Well, that one, they talk about the need to get rid of drugs, but which is unfortunate because it mutes the dialogue which really needed, which is on gun control. So they sort of detract from that. But you see overall that makes them look like they're doing something for the public good. And then in that way they
Yeah.
can raise money. They raise money from non-Scientologists, Scientologists alike. And it's a way of sort
Well,
of, you know, yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say on that point, like raising money. So like with the recent IS event, they will 100% take any kind of prosecution of a psychiatrist. They'll take the stats of people who went through the museum, and especially anybody who was important, like if there's a mayor or a council person or something like that, and they will use these stats to make it look like what they're actually doing is broader scale than it actually is, in order to convince Scientologists to give more money towards the IS, so they can keep doing this and build up the quote unquote war chest,
Right.
and of course pay for more prosecution, investigation, and so forth. When in fact they have more than enough money already in their bank accounts just sitting there. But they just want to keep bringing more and more in because they have to do that. That's all they do is bring
Yeah, I
money in.
think they have more than we
Um,
know, actually.
oh, 100%. And it just continually just reinforces this black and white, us versus them mentality for the Scientologist versus regular mankind, and of course with psychiatry and psychology. So it's very damaging. And as Apostate Alex says in here, one of the reasons for the actual building itself in the museum is safe pointing. So
Yeah,
getting the
yeah, I was
message
going to
out.
mention that. No, it's true. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. You're lagging a
No, it's
little,
good.
so I
Yeah,
jumped
just
back
getting the
to say.
message out for so in case someone does come up to the council person and tell them the truth, then they have this already preconceived notion of what Scientology is quote unquote doing for the society to make it seem like, oh, well, this person complaining about Scientology is obviously crazy because I've seen this evidence, when in fact it's all fabricated.
Yeah, no, Alex is right about safe pointing. I mean, there is I remember I was down at the museum doing something. I don't know. We had to upgrade the TV sets or some shit like that, and there was a group of nursing students going through the museum from a local nursing school. And so I asked what was going on, and they said, oh, it's actually on the curriculum of this nursing school that they have to go to the museum. It's like it's a requirement. Like they had actually, I don't know if that's true anymore. This was years ago. I mean, the thing's been open for what, 15 years? But so that you would consider that very successful safe pointing. If you have a nursing school that's pointing towards the museum and saying, yeah, that's valuable information.
Yeah, and it makes it look like they're valid, that they're actually a museum, when
Yeah,
in fact it's
completely.
biased. Like if you go to a museum, you don't it's not there's no museums that I'm aware of anyway that are legit. They're just saying they're bashing a field or a people or anything. It's just
Yeah, totally,
artifacts of
totally.
reality.
And they're not really offering an alternative.
Hmm.
You know, like what alternative are they offering? They're not.
Well, Scientology.
I know, but they're not. They don't even push that. I mean, they don't push it directly, but they don't offer Scientology as an alternative to severely mentally ill people. I mean, look, it's a fact, and this is
It's
one of the
true.
things. If you made a list of all the things that drove a wedge between me, psychologically, mentally, spiritually, whatever, and Scientology, one of them would be the complete cognitive dissonance that I had to go through in order to do that that museum, right? And to realize that
Mhm.
there are really severely upset people in the world. Call them mentally ill, call whatever. Maybe some of it's physiological, a lot of it's circumstantial. They lose their jobs. As a result of losing their jobs, they lose their families. As a result of losing their families, they become incredibly depressed. They lose their homes. They're on the street. I mean, these are like, most of these people were okay. And then they had whatever happened to them that put them there. And we generally don't take care of those people. They end up homeless. They end up criminals. They end up in prison. And I remember when I was reading Robert Whitaker's very good book called Mad in America, and he was saying that one of the reasons that the psychiatric industry especially does so well is that they have this unspoken promise with the American public. The American public needs someone to keep a lid on the nut house, and that's what psychiatrists do. And most people don't want to know, they don't want to look at it, they don't care about the really damaging drugs, just keep a lid on the nut house. And it's kind of how they get away with it. So it's really easy for Scientology to come along and go, well, we're exposing that. But in terms of those really upset people, they're not going to get help from Scientology. They're not going to walk into an org and say, I'm suicidal, I'm this, I'm that, I need help. They're going to say, GTFO, dude, not in my work,
Yep.
right? I don't want to see your brain splattered all over the bathroom. And they can't offer anything to help these kinds of people. Even if psychiatry
Well, I mean,
gives,
sorry,
it's okay.
on the topic of unaliving yourself. When I was younger, I said that I wanted to do that. I was 14 years old, and I was told I wasn't offered help or anything like that, saying or even sympathy. I was told that if I did it, I'd just come back worse off than I was, and
Yeah,
that's how they think about it, right? You know, like
yeah,
what is the
yeah.
worst thing you could possibly say to someone who is having these thoughts? If you do that, you're just going to get worse. It's like, oh, okay, well, then I guess I'm screwed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I
So
mean, unfortunately, a lot
gross.
when people are traumatized to that degree where that is what their reality is, generally speaking, they end up getting more trauma. Like if they seriously seem like they're in danger to themselves, they will be the equivalent of arrested. They'll be handcuffed, they'll be
Yep.
handcuffed to a gurney, handcuffed to an ambulance, taken to a locked ward, thrown in a locked ward, deprived of all of their rights for at least 72 hours, sometimes much longer. And that's how we generally deal with very traumatized people. And Scientology has, they have no alternative. They're offering no alternative to that. They are, they are
Absolutely.
self-proclaimed. They exist to help the able become more able. To, so some of these people, as bad as some of the treatment can be, um, at least they're getting fed and they're being prevented from destroying their own lives until maybe they can get at least that. And Scientology would just have them wandering the streets. So, because really, if you take it to the nth degree, what are they talking about? If you get rid of all the psychiatric institutions, like his name, I think I said his name wrong, but the author of the book, Man in America, I can't think of his name, but it's a very celebrated textbook. Um, but like he said, like their job in society is to keep a lid on the nut house. And Scientology wants to take the lid off, but that's all they want to do. They just
Yeah.
want to take the lid off.
Well, there was a psychiatric hospital in BC that shut down, BC, Canada, called Riverview, and it was full of very disturbed individuals, including some criminally insane and so forth. And it was shut down, and all the patients had to go somewhere because these people were not functional like, in society on a normal level. Like they were severely damaged, and they ended up living on the street. And then, of course, your shelters get overrun with people who have severe mental illness that cannot control themselves. And then the people who are working at these shelters don't know how to deal with them. They just get booted
Right,
out onto the street, and then the police get called on them, and the police don't know what to do with them either. So it's just like shutting down this hospital didn't fix
right.
anything, and in fact, it just made the situation even worse. But what do you do, right? Like if there's no solution, what do you do? You
Yeah,
know?
exactly. I have to
So,
mention one of our commenters mentioned that they had 4 times voluntarily admitted themselves to psychiatric ward and wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for this the help that they got in. And I'm not discounting that at all. I've heard about this. I have
mhm,
not seen it personally, but I know somebody well who that there are hospitals that really will support the traumatized. And one thing I've noticed in my own observation is that the younger you are, the more you seem to get help. They seem to treat the elderly with a little less. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's like triage. In my experience, they seem to be much more sympathetic towards young people. But I'm happy
mhm.
for you, Kat, and I'm sorry that happened, and I hope you're well. And it does you actually can get help, and you are better off going and seeking help from a psychiatric institute if you're in that situation than not. I'm referring to the worst of it, the broken systems. The one that I'm specifically referring to is considered the most broken system in America. I'm not going to mention any names because I think they might try to commit me for being insane for talking bad about them. But anyway, I
Well, I
just
think the important thing to note in all this discussion is that if you need help, go find it somewhere. If something doesn't work for you, look somewhere else.
yeah.
Whereas when you're in Scientology, you can only look one direction, and that direction will not help you. That direction is, of course, Scientology, and it's quote unquote technology, which is not scientific at all. Um, I think that's the most important thing to note, as well as this comment here by Purple Groove 69. Scientology creates mental illness, and
Yeah.
absolutely, you're right, it
Yeah,
does.
it's a mental health harming.
Um,
I mean, in my observation, the higher you go in Scientology, the more difficulty you'll have leaving. And I say that from personal experience. Once you get into OT levels, I mean, you are just really trading any sense of core identity or any opportunity for real self-discovery and self-awareness. You're trading that all for this fake narrative, and you're paying for it. And it's really
mhm.
difficult to untangle all of that stuff. Some people, you know, I had a conversation the other day about this, and a person texted me, and I did this short. I think I was talking to Karen De La Carrier, and I was saying, people leave cults because of the abuse, not because you and I speak out. People who are responsive to you and I or anybody speaking out, like on YouTube, they're responsive because they've started to become abused. This is,
Mhm.
for me, this is true in most cases. People who've never been abused and they're having a great time, right? Or they're not aware of the kind of abuse that they've gone through because they haven't been punched, hit, kicked, slapped, locked in a room, or told to disconnect from their family. But when people have suffered enough abuse and they hear the negative things, they hear the facts, then they leave. And somebody wrote me and said, well, that wasn't true for me. I was in the Sea Org for 2 years. I remained a Scientologist for many years after that. And when I left, it was no problem. And I wasn't able to really uh, I wasn't really able to get a dialogue going with this person. But my suspicion is that if you haven't gone that high up the bridge, if you haven't gone past clear, and if when you decide to leave, you're not facing financial insecurity like many of us are, like I was facing homelessness to leave because I wasted 30 years of a career and I had no work and blah, blah, blah. So if you have a good support system and you have financial security and you haven't gone too high up the bridge, uh, many people just leave and they say, I'm done, and they move on. But if you don't have
Mhm.
anything to move on to, and you don't have anyone to support your leaving, which was the situation I was in, it is really difficult. I mean, it is just a bad situation, which I've written
Yeah, and
about
finally,
some.
so like when we were at the protest this weekend, we made such a fuss. Actually, I should say that Scientology created such a traffic jam on these roads that every Scientologist had to walk or drive by us with our signs and everything. And I was saying hello to people and trying to be nice. And there were a few Scientologists who said that, "Oh, I don't know what you guys are talking about. I've had nothing but good things happen to me, right? And those are the people who aren't going to be reached by our message. It's the people who have been abused, who are about to give again more and more money away, have to open up a new line of credit. Any kind of thing that is questionable about Scientology for them is going to get kind of reinforced with our messaging and so forth. And so just to point out that comment that yes, people who are really happy with something aren't going to try and leave it, but if you can plant a seed as that abuse does happen, which it inevitably will, then they will then remember that and know that there is help elsewhere, right? That
Yeah,
makes
yeah,
sense.
no, it's important work. It's important. I mean, it's important to keep the messaging going. It's like, I mean, Scientology. I've said it before. To me, the best way you describe Scientology, it's a global crime scene, and it's unfolding in real time, which I think is one of the reasons why it's so interesting to people. And because it's so interesting, we should continue to speak about our own experiences, having been part of the criminal organization of Scientology, whether we were working for them, like I did, whether we were, dedicated and contributing members, which I was for many years, but I worked for them when long after I wasn't. That's its own form of abuse, by the way. When you continue to compromise your own moral compass because for opportunistic reasons, so that you can achieve financial and maybe personal aesthetic goals, it actually chips away at your mental well-being. But sorry, I make
Yeah.
everything about me. It's just sorry.
Well, this is what this is about. Like, so we're telling our story, and that's the only story that we can tell
Yeah,
because those are the only stories that we can tell, right? It's our story. I would like to, we're coming up on an hour, which is amazingly quick. I don't know how that happened already. But I would like to address a couple of questions,
yeah.
comments,
Let's
if you're
do
keen
that.
for that. Cool. So Danielle here, Mitch, of all the films you made, which ones are you most proud of?
That's a really interesting question.
Danielle is a very lovely person, by the way, and
Oh,
that's a
did you
great
meet her
question.
over in England?
Yeah,
Which
so
I'm the
so
most
when
proud
we
of.
went to the Sunderland org, we were up there because we were visiting Neville and Danielle, um, and it was a lovely visit.
Okay, so usually when people say, like I said, oh, really good question, or they say interesting question, my theory is that they're just buying time because they don't have an answer yet. So I'm going to have to, for five
That's
minutes,
okay.
go, good question, interesting question.
Interesting. Yes, great.
I
Let me think
actually
about that.
think it's really funny. I actually think the one that I'm the most proudest of was the last one that I made that they'll never show. And it's
Mm.
called My Only Defense for Having Lived. And the fact that I said that
Oh,
on
okay.
YouTube means they'll never show it. But I made it for the TV network. It's based on an essay that Hubbard wrote called "My Only Defense for Having Lived." And Miscavige he asked for the film to be made. It's the most beautiful film I ever made for them. Excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. No, I'm okay. I'm having that. What do they say? Do this. No, it's a beautiful film, but the thing about it is, it's this almost self-effacing statement that he wrote, where he is very humble, and he said, "I was just a mildly popular writer, and then overnight I became a villain." He's talking about after he wrote Dynamic, and he really talks about himself, and he's very humble, very like let his hair down, and you almost kind of start to like the guy. So I was given every resource that I needed to shoot this film, and it was a period piece, and it was he didn't ever read this essay, so it was not his voice. It was somebody else just reading the essay, and it's a
Yeah.
really beautiful film, and then they never programmed it to be shown, and I'm sure it's because Miscavige doesn't like the idea that Hubbard was being kind of very humble and self-effacing and saying, look, you can only
Wow.
judge me on one thing, and that's did I do what I said I was going to do? Like, just judge me on that, right? And so anyway, I actually wish I had a copy of that because I'm really proud of it. Other than that, I
Yeah.
don't
Well, that's
know.
cool.
I don't really know. But I mean, because if I could just add something to that, like David
Mhm.
Miscavige will never do that. He will never sit down and write an essay called "My Only Defense for Having Lived" and talk about, and I could give you an anecdote about this. I recently spoke with someone who was, uh, he was, I'm trying to think, as I don't want to bring too much undue attention on this, but let's just say theoretically that this person had been hired to write a flattering book on David Miscavige. And let's just say
Okay.
theoretically that this person had a meeting with David
Theoretically.
Miscavige, and this person asked, now, made the point that, now, David, at some point, we're going to have to talk about the times that you felt you were in error, that you doubted your own self, whatever, because if we're going to write a biography about you, it's like every great person in history has had these moments. Everybody from Mother Teresa to Winston Churchill to John F. Kennedy to Abraham Lincoln to Mahatma Gandhi. If you study these people, they will talk about
Mhm.
times when they were, full of self doubt and they felt that they made a mistake. So after that meeting, theoretically, this person was theoretically taken aside by some of Miscavige's handlers and said, "You don't understand. This man is perfect. He's never made a mistake." And that's why he won't let that film shown, because it's a film of
Mhm.
Hubbard talking about the times when he was in doubt and wondered about if he'd made a mistake and was being very humble. So
Yeah, that's not
anyway,
something that can happen. Like Hubbard can't be wrong because
you
as
mean
soon as
Miscavige?
as soon as the church admits something that is wrong, that opens the door for other things and doubt. And doubt
Yeah,
is very bad in
yeah,
Scientology.
yeah, really bad.
Yeah. Cool. So SP Chef here says Scientology's binary view of the world will not allow them to look at psychiatry and recognize any good part of it. If something has been stamped as bad, then is all bad. That's correct.
Yeah, yeah, and that goes all the
And
way
you can't
down.
change any policy.
Yeah, that goes all the way down to drinking water. Like when Miscavige was hanging out at the Gold Base, before he blew out of there for good. It's like whatever water he was drinking, right? Like whether it was, he had a couple of favorite brands, but whatever the favorite brand du jour of bottled water was, that's what the ordering people in the food services people would just order tons and tons and tons of stuff, and that's what everybody would drink, right? Because that's the
Hmm.
one he was drinking. Like if he was into something, then that was the right thing, and everything else was shit. He was like
Yeah.
such a, what do you call it, a an influencer within,
Oh, yeah. The
about
biggest influencer.
yeah, no, about everything, about how to tie your tie. And when I would have a character in a film, like, I mean, there is a correct way to tie a tie, but boy, it better be perfect, or you'd and it's like Miscavige, he doesn't have any taste. I mean, he grew up in Philadelphia. His father was kind of a, whatever. He was a musician, or whatever, but he grew up in kind of this lowbrow background, right? He's not like a tastemonger, but people would give him things. Like somebody said, "You should read this book by Alan Flusser called Clothes and the Man. He sets the standard for men's haberdashery." Uh, this guy was hired as the consultant on the film Wall Street to decode the costumes of investors, right? Like how
Mm.
do they dress? So he's a very noted guy. Somebody tells Miscavige that they give him the book, and then all of a sudden he becomes that expert and dictates everything and makes everybody read it. You get what I'm saying? So it's like all of his
Yeah,
taste is,
of course.
it's all borrowed. It's all nothing is his.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. We'll do one quick one here. Well, it could be quick, maybe not. With this question for both of us, Jeff and Mitch, could you touch on a therapy slash coping mechanism that helped you most while recovering from Scientology? And I will give you a second to think about that, Mitch, while I answer that
Yeah,
question.
go ahead, please.
Um, so for me, my biggest difficulty in recovering from Scientology has been emotions and being able to check in with emotions and express emotions. And this is something I continuously work on, but I basically need to, if I find myself shutting down, I the most valuable thing that I do is I speak to somebody and express that I'm feeling a certain way as best I can. And that person, of course, usually is my wife, because she is very, very supportive and is great at answering or asking questions and helping me think a bit more about it. But even if she wasn't around, then of course, the most important thing is to just say, hey, I feel blah, whatever it is. It may not be the correct emotion, but opening up and actually communicating, I found was the most valuable thing for me, because then I can actually start to explore versus just kind of go in further in myself and wonder and not really know, if that makes sense, you know? So what do
That
you
makes
think,
sense.
Mitch? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, therapy coping mechanism. I spent a year and a half on my sofa playing Overwatch, and that kept me engaged enough so that I wasn't gonna, you know, although that was a real possibility. And then I got up off my ass and I started writing a book, and
Mm.
that really helped a lot. And I didn't do it because I wanted to, I did it because I felt that my entire purpose and my entire career had been such a waste, and that
Mm.
I wanted there to be some real evidence of my existence, because I really didn't know how much longer I was
Mm-hmm.
going to be around. I wanted there to be some, I wanted to leave something that was genuinely, authentically me. I had done a lot of writing for 30, 40 years, mostly scripts, and I knew a lot about screenwriting and how to write for films. So I thought, at least I can leave something. I can leave some of my internal world. And then I wrote almost 100,000 words in like 7 months. It was pretty amazing. And then people started reading it, and I asked them for help, like, what do you think? And then all of it, people were like, whoa, they really liked it a lot, and so I finished it, and I got it made into it, and that helped a lot. But I think your question, Kat, is very specific, and I will say, I went through about 5 therapists, because that is one thing in therapy, and just so you know, I got a nasty letter. I've spoken about this. I got a nasty letter from Gold, and they think that I'm only speaking out against them because I'm under the influence of a therapist, which is the most ridiculous. I know, seriously,
Jeez,
like they
Christ.
said that, but literally that you're
Wow.
now just being controlled by it's crazy. But I finally did find one that I enjoyed talking to. It wasn't that I didn't enjoy
Mm-hmm.
them, but there wasn't really a connection. One of them was horrible. 3 of them were okay. One of them was brilliant, but I couldn't understand. She was very Japanese. I couldn't understand her accent. And so one of the things we did is DBT, a dialectical behavior therapy, which was originally invented for borderline personality disorder, which is not something that I have, according to my therapist. But I'll tell you, in terms of a coping mechanism, like the OT levels are a coping mechanism. And I want to contrast and compare two different coping mechanisms, one from Scientology and
Mm-hmm.
one from psychology. And I'm sorry if this is taking a little long, but I think this is really important. There's
Mm-hmm.
a coping mechanism. The reason that I say the OT levels are a coping mechanism, excuse me,
It's okay.
I did that down the wrong pipe. The reason, oh my God, I'm so sorry, guys. I have a
It
drinking
happens
problem.
to all of us.
I didn't tell you guys I have a drinking problem.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I
You just showed us right on
I don't
live
know how to,
television that you have a
I don't
drinking
know how to,
problem.
I don't know how to drink. I have a drinking problem. So anyway, in the OT levels, because of the whole BT theory, this whole BT construct, you have these entities that are stuck to your body. They're attached to you, or they're in your immediate environment, and you come to believe that their thoughts, like, imagine that reality is this movie that's playing on the back of your eyes, and there's some unknown thing that's splicing in bits and pieces of emotion and information. This is not some, Scientology is not going to say this. I'm using this analogy. They're splicing that in, but then you're just seeing your reality. You're not aware of the fact that some of this stuff is being entered, cut into your movie by these entities, so that you no longer trust, right? It's so you get into some really gnarly stuff that you did and conclusions you've made and thoughts you've had, and you get into this thing of like, oh, that wasn't me, that was the body Thetan, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
this is a coping mechanism because, I realized this because a few months ago, I was speaking with an old friend of mine who's not in Scientology anymore. This person is a very highly trained auditor and they're OT8, right? And they 100% hate Miscavige and Scientology. They don't practice it anymore, but they believe in the tech. They hate the church. They don't hate Scientology. They believe in the tech. They believe in
Right.
BTs. And this person said, I know that it's true because when I have some horrible negative emotion, I didn't ask her why she's still having those if she's OT8, but she said when I have, like she was saying, when I'm triggered, I can say to myself, oh, that's not me. I know that's not me.
Mm.
So they can take the trigger, they can put it somewhere else, and they can regulate their emotions based on that false narrative. So you see how that's a coping mechanism?
Well,
You
I mean,
get what I
it's
mean?
definitely avoidance of actual emotion, which I find
Yeah, but
interesting. It's something that I've had to deal with a lot too.
yeah, but it's not just avoidance. Like what are they? There's a word for that where you're just not allowing yourself to see it. You're fully allowing yourself to experiencing it, and then you're putting it somewhere else, right? And in dialectical behavioral, so you're not actually becoming more self-aware when you do that. You're becoming less self-aware because you're taking your emotions and your feelings and you're saying, no, those aren't me. I'm okay. You get what I'm saying? So each time you do that,
Yep.
you're refuting your own identity, your own thoughts, your own emotions, and you're becoming less self-aware. Now contrast that with a therapy like dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT. You have one aspect of
Hmm.
that therapy where you are taking a look at a moment where you became triggered, where you became, as they say, emotionally dysregulated, right? And then you are practicing a technique whereby you're able to deconstruct the steps that got you to that. Like what was going on? What because they're locked together like chains, just like chains in Scientology. They're linked
Yeah.
together. There's all these thoughts, emotions, and actions that are linked to that moment when you got triggered. And by going back and deconstructing those and seeing where they are, you become emotionally regulated. You become better able to cope in the future, and you become able to cope at that moment. And most importantly, you've become more self-aware because you observe these things in yourself, right? And that was hugely helpful to me. And Kat, I hope that answers your question. So, because
That's awesome. No,
that's
that's
one,
amazing.
and
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
I was able to kind of deconstruct it against the body Thetan coping mechanism. Because you leave Scientology, you realize that's all shit. You've given up all your coping mechanisms. I mean, what do you have? You have what's left. You could drink, take drugs, or compulsive sex, or whatever. One of these kind of because those are trauma responses. Those are often those types of coping mechanisms or a lot of trauma responses are coping mechanisms or anyway the need to cope is often a response to trauma. So I didn't mean to get technical on everybody, but
It's totally
you know
fine. I love it.
that
I love
was
it. I really like, I think, and we'll end off pretty quick here, but I just want to say
okay.
that like one thing that is the purpose of my channel, and of course, just my life right now is figuring out, other things that are wrong with me and things that I can do to improve who I am and learn who I am. So I do appreciate all the different experiences that yourself and other people who have reached out to me have. I would like to end with this comment here. This is Brad. He was our security guard for the protest. He's a lovely man who I am going to be having a conversation with, hopefully very soon. But he says, I'm happy to talk about my mental health. I think it helps me understand it better. And there's no better way to say that. If you are struggling with mental health at all and you need someone to talk to, make sure you find that person, whether it's a friend or a psychologist or anyone else that you
Yeah.
feel you can trust enough um, to just open yourself up to. It has been very valuable for me. And I would also like to say thank you, Brad, for the super chat earlier. I kind of disappeared on me, but you have been a huge help, and I really do appreciate you very much. Um, Mitch, before
sir?
we go,
Okay.
your book, it's coming out November 24th. Is that correct?
Yeah, November 24th. I've actually decided to, most people self-publish they self-publish on Amazon, which is great to do, but if you're self-publishing, it's kind of hard to get into bookstores. I've had like a lot of experience in the past working on marketing campaigns and book marketing campaigns, and I was involved in a campaign that sold 10 million Dianetics books. So because of that, I'd really like to get the message, Scientology, the big lie, into bookstores. I can't really afford to do that because you got to buy ads. Like you have to create demand, and then the bookstores will order it. They can't order it from Amazon because they don't buy from Amazon. They buy from a company
Right.
called Ingram. And so I've also am self-publishing through Ingram, so the book is available to bookstores if there's a demand. To create a demand, I have to do an advertising campaign. So I've started another Indiegogo campaign. You'll have to search for it. It's on actually there's a link to it on my channel page on YouTube. And so if you donate somebody to that, you'll be helping to get that message out. Even if we don't sell books, even if we can get it into bookstores, there's going to be a lot of Sea Org members and Scientologists. They're going to be going to Barnes & Noble and where else this Christmas, and they can maybe avoid all this stuff on the internet, but they can't avoid it walking into a bookstore. So I very much want to get
Exactly.
that message out there. And your help is appreciated, and
So we
thank you
can,
for liking and subscribing.
yeah,
Sorry?
absolutely. And do so. Anybody who wants to help our channel, for myself, I love to see comments on my videos. I respond to all of them eventually. I am a little bit behind right now, but liking, subscribing. If you'd like to support myself financially, you can buy me a coffee. There's a link in all my videos. It goes directly towards ensuring that I can keep doing this. I can spend more time doing it, and any donations are appreciated. Make sure you do check out Mitch's channel if you are not subscribed yet. And of course, when his book does come out, or if you'd like to support the book financially and get it into the bigger bookstores so he can reach more Scientologists, go to his Indiegogo, which I will get a link from you, Mitch, and I'll put it in this video. And of course, you have a video on your site as well.
Yeah, and also I've
and
launched, there's a merch store supporting the book at mitchbrisker.com. And anything you buy from there will go towards the marketing campaign for the book.
So that's
So we got that all going on.
www.mitchbrisker.com.
Yeah, last I looked, yeah.
Perfect. Well, go check that out. Mitch, as always, it's a pleasure talking with you. We'll have to do this again soon. And for everyone watching, thank you for joining us right to the very end. We'll see you next time.